What really happened out on Skeleton Lake when the canoe overturned in the freezing dark? Survival or something far worse? And if only one man made it back to shore, can we truly trust the story he brought with him? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's story is Skeleton Lake, an episode in camp by Algernon Blackwood. A classic horror story, reimagined and retold for the modern age.
The name alone should have warned them. Skeleton Lake. It sat in the Quebec backwoods like something abandoned on purpose. 5 days by trail and canoe from the nearest town. 5 days from clocks, from voices, from anything that reminded you the world still existed. Out here, distance wasn't measured in miles, it was measured in silence. And the silence here was deep. In these forests, names aren't invented, they're earned, pressed into maps by men who survived something or didn't. Smith's Ridge, Deep Rapids, Long Island, each word a memory, each memory a wound. Names like these didn't come from imagination, they came from necessity, from what happened, from what was left behind. So, Skeleton Lake. No one in camp knew the story, no one reached for it. But when the sun dropped below the tree line and the last of October's light bled out of the sky, something changed. The mist would begin to rise from the water, slow, patient. It would curl between the black trunks like breath, like something exhaling just beyond the edge of the firelight. Everyone felt it. No one said it. That particular stillness, the kind that doesn't feel empty, the kind that feels occupied. They were hundreds of miles from anyone, almost. 6 weeks ago, on the train heading north, they had encountered the others. A group from somewhere near Boston, arriving at North Bay with the noise of men who confuse volume with presence. Their leader, restless, abrasive, was the kind of man who occupies a space without being invited into it. Introductions were made. A shared destination smoothed things over, briefly, but the acquaintance never deepened. What kept even the thread of connection alive was something smaller. A quiet understanding between Jake, the Swede who guided the Boston party, and one of their own men. Thin, almost nothing. The Boston group had gone west, Beaver Creek, 50 miles at least, perhaps more. That was 6 weeks ago. It felt like 6 months. Time doesn't work the same out here. The days are long and strange, the nights longer. Their camp was small. The professor, his wife, a woman who could read the forest the way others read books and place a rifle shot with absolute calm, and himself. Each with a guide, each day, 2 by 2, into the trees before the sun arrived, and back only when the dark made it necessary. Their guides always knew by something below instinct where the Boston party was moving, but no one had found their trail. No one had heard a single shot. The forest had simply taken them in.
The last night. Nobody said it like that. Nobody had to. The camp knew. One canoe already sat packed and waiting at the water's edge, her nose turned south, moose horns loaded heavy in her belly. The smell of wood smoke and cooking drifted through the cold air. Men moved with the particular energy of people preparing to leave somewhere they will not return to. Inside the wedge tent, the professor was talking. He was always talking. He lay stretched across the bedroll, working through some theory about the risks of hunting in pairs. What would happen, he was saying, if one of them didn't come back? The survivor's story would be entirely unsupported evidence. He used that exact kind of language, precise, constructed, the language of a man who had never needed to be interesting. Because you see, the words kept coming. They always did. And somewhere in the middle of them, the mind began to drift, away from the tent, away from his voice, back toward the lakes, Garden Lake with its scatter of 100 islands sitting quiet in the morning haze, the pull of white water out of Round Pond, the forests burning crimson and gold under October sun, like something that knew it was dying and chose to be beautiful anyway. The long, cold nights crouched at the water's edge, barely breathing, waiting for a moose that may or may not come. The professor's voice became a hum, low, distant, almost comfortable. A nod was enough, a grunt. He required nothing more. He didn't want a conversation, he wanted an audience, and an audience needed to be present. The eyes grew heavy. Perhaps they closed. Perhaps sleep came, briefly, the kind that arrives without asking and leaves no trace. And then, everything stopped. Not gradually, not with warning. Stopped. The voice gone. Then footsteps, fast and light across the pine needles, the sound of someone running who was trying not to run. Then voices, men's voices, colliding with each other, too many at once. And then she was there, the professor's wife, standing at the tent entrance, no hat, her face the color of paper, the hunting bloomers twisted at the wrong angles, the rifle gripped in one hand, her words arriving faster than her breath could carry them. "Quick, Harry, it's Rushton. I was asleep and it woke me. Something's happened. You must deal with it." 1 second. That was all. Then they were outside, rifles in hand, cold air against the skin. The camp suddenly sharp and too bright and wrong in a way that had no name yet. And from somewhere close, the professor's voice, not lecturing now, not constructing careful sentences, just 3 words, raw, like something pulled out of him. "My God, it is Rushton."
They were dragging him. 2 guides, a body between them, a canoe rocking in the shallows behind, sending small waves crawling up the sand in the dark. Then, silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that fills a space where sound should be. The waves against the shore, the fire popping somewhere behind, nothing else. And then he started talking. Rushton. The words came fast, too fast, gaps between them that made no sense, pauses in the wrong places, silences where sentences should have been, sentences where silence was needed. His voice moved without warning from a whisper to something close to a shout. Sobs inside the words, oaths, prayers almost. The name of God used the way men use it when they have run out of everything else. Something was wrong. Not with the facts of what he was saying. No one had heard enough yet to question facts. It was something underneath the words, a frequency below hearing, the way a room can feel different before you understand why. Something had arrived with him. It moved in the space between his sentences, like a shape behind glass, not visible but present. The stars above the camp seemed suddenly less certain, the warmth of the fire less convincing, and every person standing in that clearing felt it press against them, private and cold like a finger finding the back of the neck. The image never left. Even years later it remained, sharp and still as a photograph. The men positioned halfway between firelight and dark, a thin mist lifting off the water, stars hard and frostbright overhead. The guides moving carefully across the rocks, moccasins grinding into sand, slipping once, twice under the dead weight of him. Rushton, barely holding himself upright, every muscle surrendered. And in his hand, or dragging beside him, a branch, a stripped cedar branch, shaven down to use as a paddle,
Whatever canoe he had arrived in, this was what he had used to move it. Across how much water? In what conditions? Alone. The contradiction was what silenced everyone first. His body had nothing left, hollow, wrung out, the kind of exhaustion that goes past the physical into something the body doesn't have a name for. And yet his voice was driven, pressurized, forced outward by something that wouldn't allow silence. The words poured and poured, hot and urgent, crowding over each other, full of details that didn't align, contradictions that corrected themselves and then contradicted themselves again. When they lifted him into the firelight, everything became clear, and worse. His face beneath the tan had gone the color of ash. His eyes were moving, always moving, skipping from face to face to face, searching each one for something. Confirmation, perhaps, agreement, the recognition of someone who had also seen. No one had seen, not but him, and one other. There were 4 of them listening. Matt Morris, patient and still. Silver Fizz, real name unknown to anyone, the title borrowed from a drink he preferred, watching with sharp, quiet eyes. Hank Milligan, enormous and earnest, and the narrator, standing slightly back, understanding arriving before he could stop it. None of them spoke what they were thinking. It would be years before any of them did. It was Silver Fizz who moved first, the kind of man the wilderness produces in certain rare quantities, someone in whom decency is not a choice but a reflex. He looked at Rushton, he saw what was happening, and he began, carefully, to try to give the man some ground to stand on.
"Never mind that now," Silver Fizz said it, quietly. The gruffness in his voice was protective, the kind men use when they're trying to build a wall around something fragile before it collapses entirely. "Get something in you first. Food, whiskey. Talk after." But Rushton wasn't listening, or couldn't. "I can't eat." The words came out cracked at the edges. "Don't you understand? I need to talk. I need someone who can answer me." He looked around the fire, face to face to face. 3 days. 3 days with nothing but trees. I've told the trees 1,000 times, and they just stand there, silent, watching. A pause. Something moved behind his eyes. "I can't carry it alone anymore." No one stopped him. They had understood by then that stopping him was not possible. The story was already in motion, had been since the moment his canoe touched the shore. It was going to come out. The only question was what shape it would take when it did. And so it came. The story itself was ordinary enough. That was the first strange thing. Around any fire, in any camp, in any stretch of deep wilderness, men told stories like this. Mishaps, close calls, the woods doing what the woods do to people who stay in them long enough. There was nothing in the events themselves that should have silenced a circle of experienced men. It was everything else. The words he chose, theatrical, stretched to their edges, borrowed from some register that lived just at the border of reason. The rhythm of his speech, lurching and pressurized, like something being forced through a space too narrow for it. And the eyes, always the eyes moving, landing on each face in turn, searching, asking, "Do you believe me? Do you see it? Tell me you see it," before sliding to the next. What would you have done? What else could I do? Was that my fault? He wasn't weak. No one thought that. He drove his account forward with the force of a man who has decided that the only escape is through, forcing his version of events into each listener as if he could press it there permanently, make it the only version, seal every other interpretation out. But here was the thing.
the thing. No one said that night, and that took years for any of them to admit aloud. The words were almost right, almost the truth. They skimmed along its surface the way a stone skims water, fast, touching, never breaking through. And in that thin space between what he said and what had actually happened, the real image lived, vivid, uncontrollable. His own mind could not contain it, and so it crossed the firelight without his permission. While he spoke, it assembled itself behind him, pressed against the dark, sharp in every detail. He knew. And, in that particular silent way that the worst moments are shared between people who will never speak of them directly, he knew that they knew. The fire crackled. The mist moved. The trees stood at the edge of the light, exactly as they always had, saying nothing, watching everything.
The lake had no mercy. 9 feet of canoe, 2 men, and then nothing beneath them. The water took everything in an instant. The boat flipped, and the world turned cold and dark and wrong. Jake and Rushton locked hands across the hull, fingers interlaced above the overturned shell of wood that was the only thing standing between them and the deep. Hours passed. The cold crept in, slow, patient, deliberate. Their grip began to fail, so they cut holes through the ribs of the canoe and pushed their arms inside, holding each other through the wood itself, refusing to let go. The wind had its own plans. It pushed them, steadily, toward a small island sitting alone in the gray distance. They watched it grow, closer, closer, and then a shift, subtle at first, then undeniable. They were going to miss it. That was when everything broke. Jake wanted to swim, leave the canoe, go now while the island was still visible, still possible. Rushton said, no, wait. Once they cleared the island's edge, the wind would die. The canoe would make it. They would make it together. But Jake wouldn't hear it. Something had snapped inside him. Fear, maybe, or certainty, or something else entirely. There was a struggle. Rushton admitted that much. And then Jake was gone. No cry, no final word, just gone, swallowed by the water as if he had never been there at all. Rushton held on. 5 hours in freezing water, 5 hours of nothing but cold and silence and the distant shape of land. And when the island finally came within reach, he dragged himself and the canoe ashore and collapsed, face down on the rocks, feet still trailing in the water, unconscious before he could think another thought. He woke in the dark, alone. The canoe had drifted off. The island was silent in a way that felt alive. He lay still for a moment, listening to nothing, feeling the particular terror of a man who has survived something he doesn't yet understand. Then, luck. Impossible, quiet luck. The canoe had snagged on a cedar branch at the far end of the island. The small axe had lodged itself in the thwart when the boat flipped, and the matchbox in his breast pocket, sealed in a little glass bottle, was dry. He built a fire, a real one, high and blazing and desperate. Then he searched. He called Jake's name into the darkness over and over, moving through the trees, across the rocks, along the waterline. No answer came, but other things did. Shapes, half-seen figures dragging themselves out of the water onto the shore, pale, dripping, silent, only to dissolve into shadow the moment he moved toward them. Again and again, each time his lantern swung their way, they were gone. He stopped searching. He went back to the fire and lay down and did not move until morning. At first light, he cut a branch to use as a paddle. He searched the island one final time, methodically, quietly, without hope. Then he lowered himself into the canoe, balanced himself with the careful terror of a man who knows exactly what water can do, and pushed off toward the mainland. He paddled for 2 days. No food, no shelter, portaging through the wilderness with nothing but the axe and the clothes on his back. He knew roughly where our camp was. He came to us hollow-eyed and barely standing. That was the story. And we knew this man. We knew these waters. We knew that every single detail he gave us was the precise and literal truth, which was exactly what made it such a perfect, monstrous lie.
When he finished speaking, he simply stopped. Not like a man who had reached the end of a story, like a man who had finally put down something too heavy to carry another step. He collapsed into himself, and for a moment no one moved. Then Silver Fizz broke the silence the only way he knew how. "Mister, you're going to eat, whether you want to or not." It wasn't a question. Matt Morris was already at the fire, trout sizzling in the pan, bacon curling at the edges, wheat cakes browning slow, the smell of hot coffee cutting through the cold night air. One by one, plates were passed around a circle that had gone very quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of men at rest, but the weighted quiet of men sitting with something they couldn't name. We ate, the way we always ate out here, completely, urgently, without ceremony. 6 weeks in the wilderness had reduced us all to that. But tonight it was different. He ate like a man who had forgotten what food was. We watched without watching. When his tin mug emptied, Morris had the pail moving before he could reach for it. When the bacon grease pooled at the edge of his plate, Hank was already extending the pan. The potatoes stayed at his side, steaming, always within reach. We orbited him without meaning to, drawn in, unable to look away, unable to explain why. And then he stopped eating, suddenly, completely. The sickness came without warning, violent and total, and it said more than any word he had spoken. 40 miles, no food, 2 days alone with the forest and the dark and whatever lived inside his own mind. His body had simply kept the account, and now it was settling it. In the darkness, he said, he thought he was losing his mind. Voices in the trees, figures rising from the water, shapes assembling themselves from shadow and stone, turning to look at him, lifting their hands in gestures he didn't want to understand. And Jake, always Jake, watching from just beyond the tree line, there, then gone, there again, eyes in the underbrush, footsteps with no source, shadows that followed. We tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, gently at first, then with more effort. It didn't matter. He couldn't stop. The story had its teeth in him, and it wasn't finished. A night's sleep might have given him distance, might have given him the mercy of perspective. But there was no distance tonight. There was only the fire, and the circle, and the thing he kept needing to say. The pipes came out, the dishes disappeared, and the pretending, the careful collective pretending, quietly ended. Above us, the fire sent its sparks spiraling upward into a sky so full of stars it seemed impossible. The air smelled of cedar and cold earth and the faint mineral trace of the lake. Somewhere along the shore, small waves moved against the rocks in a rhythm so gentle it was almost a breath. The forest stood around us, ancient, indifferent, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they have nothing to prove. It was the kind of night that reaches inside a man and changes something. None of us felt it. A bull moose could have stepped into the firelight and we wouldn't have blinked, because the night, for all its beauty, had already been claimed. Something else held the center of that circle.
something that had followed him 40 miles through the dark and arrived, quiet and uninvited, to sit among us. Jake was dead, and somehow, impossibly, he was still here.
Morris spoke first, carefully, like a man choosing his footing on thin ice. "You won't want to come along, mister, but me and one of the boys will go out and look for it." "Jake and I ran some big trips together," Hank said. His voice was flat, decided. "I'll do that much for him." Silver Fizz stared at the water somewhere beyond the firelight. "Deep round them islands, they say, but we'll find it, sure as anything, if it's there." It. They all said it, not him, not Jake. It. Nobody acknowledged the word, nobody needed to. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that presses down on a man's chest and makes breathing feel deliberate. And then he started again. The same story, the same words almost exactly, like something rehearsed, like something that had worn a groove into him and could only run in one direction. He didn't notice the looks passing between them. He didn't see the way their eyes moved, quick, careful, communicating without sound. Silver Fizz lunged in first. "I once knew another partner of Jake's. He used to work down Moose Jaw Rapids way." "Is that so?" Hank picked it up instantly. "Useful kind of feller," Morris added right behind him. They were building a wall with words, stacking sentences fast enough to block the gap, to keep him from reaching the place they all knew was coming, the place where the stories stopped adding up. It didn't work. You can't stop a current with your hands. You can't hold back what's already moving. And so I tramped all over that little bit of an island, hoping he might have somehow gotten in without my knowing it, always thinking I heard that awful last cry of his in the darkness, and then the night dropped down like a thick blanket out of the sky, and every eye in the circle dropped. Hank drove his boot into the logs. A shower of sparks scattered upward and died. Silver Fizz reached into the fire with his bare fingers and pinched a live ember, held it to his pipe, even though the pipe was already smoking. Nobody said a word. Then the professor spoke, quiet, precise, unhurried. "I thought you said he sank without a cry." He didn't look away. He held the gaze, steady, direct, while the face across the fire went through something terrible. The explanation that followed was confused, backtracking, layered with contradictions that only made the whole deeper. And that was the end of it. Not with a confrontation, not with an accusation, just a sentence, 7 words, and everything that had been held in careful suspension came apart at once. The circle broke, not dramatically, not at all once, but inevitably, the way a thing breaks when it has been under pressure long enough. People stood, moved, found reasons to be somewhere else. The professor's wife was first. She murmured something about an early start. Then she crossed to where he sat, took his hand in both of hers, and said something quiet, something about his comfort through the night. Her voice was steady, her eyes were not. She shook his hand and left.
The tent was small. The night was brutal. He was already settling into the blankets when he turned and said it, almost casually, like a man mentioning a minor inconvenience. He talked in his sleep sometimes. He hoped it wouldn't bother me. I told him it wouldn't. He was wrong, and so was I. It started quietly, a murmur. Then the murmur sharpened into something else, something with edges. The words came broken and violent, dragged up from wherever a man goes when sleep pulls him back to the worst moment of his life. He was on the lake again. I could hear it. The cold, the water, the struggle, all of it, replaying in the dark behind his eyes while I lay completely still beside him, not breathing, not moving. I had two choices: keep listening or wake him. I couldn't do either. So I did the only other thing available to me. I pulled myself out of the warmth of the sleeping bag, slowly, carefully, not making a sound, and I left. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. The stars were hard and indifferent above the tree line. The fire had burned low. I moved toward it, and then I stopped. There was someone else already there. A figure, moving along the shore in the dark, quiet, deliberate. Hank Milligan. He was crouched over the canoe, the overturned canoe, and he was looking closely, carefully, at the holes cut into the upper ribs. The holes Rushton described, the ones they'd made in the water, in the dark, half frozen, to push their arms through and hold on. Hank looked up when I approached. Something crossed his face, not quite guilt, not quite relief, something between the two. He mumbled something about the cold keeping him awake. Neither of us believed it. We stood there together in the freezing dark, and we looked at those holes, really looked, and the truth of them was immediate and absolute, and required no discussion at all. They were too small, far too small for a man's hand, far too small for an arm. No man, not even a desperate one, not even a dying one, could cut those holes from inside the water, hanging on for his life in the dark. The angles were wrong. The size was wrong. Everything was wrong. Those holes had been made afterwards, on dry land, in calm, with time. Hank said nothing. I said nothing. After a long moment, he turned and walked into the trees to gather wood for the fire. I stood alone beside the canoe and looked at it a little longer. Then I stopped looking. There are things a man sees that he cannot unsee, and there are things he chooses, very deliberately, never to speak of. 3 days later, Hank and Silver Fizz walked the old Indian trail south from Beaver Creek. The forest was silent around them. Their steps were slow and uneven, pulled off rhythm by the weight of what they carried between them. A hammock, slung from their shoulders, heavy. Neither man complained, neither man spoke much at all, but their silence was not empty. It was full to the point of breaking, dense with the kind of knowledge that changes the shape of a man's life from the moment it enters him. They had found it. 4 feet of water, 2 yards from the sheltered shore of the island, close enough that its being there in that spot meant something specific and irreversible. And at the back of the skull, a wound, long, deep, terrible, the kind no man could ever make upon himself.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.